Buenas tardes. Rogamos, por favor, vayan tomando asiento, que en breve comenzaremos.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. We're going to give a few moments of courtesy because we've been told that there's a terrible traffic jam and some people haven't even arrived yet. So we're going to wait 4 or 5 minutes so that they can arrive. So I'm going to ask you if you can please come closer to the front. Please come closer to the front because it's better to be closer together. So for those of us who are up here on stage, it's more pleasant for us to have you closer.
Sí, me comentan desde el equipo técnico que en esta zona de mi derecha
On the right-hand side, we have a blind point, a blind spot where you won't be able to see the screen. So if you could come closer to the middle, to the center, and so you will see just, so if you would come to this area as I've been mentioning.
Bueno, pues muy buenas tardes. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon again. Welcome and thank you for your participation in this conference where we, the Spanish Association of Patients with Glucosinosis and the Spanish Association of Pompe patients, they have come together to organize this international conference. This is certainly not an easy task. And to congregate in Peden who have patients, healthcare practitioners, investigators, doctors, and so forth, it's a breath of fresh air for us all to know each other, to talk about the new breakthroughs and how these minority diseases can be treated. This is a conference where we are going to try to untangle and address the reality of these glucogenoses. And we shall delve into the different types and to their peculiarities. We shall do this from the point of view of research and healthcare by evaluating the impact and the importance from the diagnostic and throughout each and every stage, vital stage of that, each patient. This is a meeting which, and actually this is something that we want to do, is it's academic, it's what I should say, a moment of being together, to share experiences, doubts, fears, hopes. This is what enriches this type of meeting, because beyond diseases, we speak about people, we speak about families, we speak about histories of different families. And I'd like to share 3 ideas with you, which I think are of utmost importance for this conference. Firstly, it is necessary to be held because it comes from a shared need to be informed, connected together, and supported and backed. Because people with whatever type of glucogenosis that a person might have, and for their families, these meetings are of utmost important. During these 2 days, we shall have the opportunity to hear first-person experience, and we'll hear about the latest novel items in research, and we shall be able to look at this multidisciplinary care, and we will be able to create a network where each and every one of us will become this connecting thread to help to treat the affected person. A second aim that we have, and this conference is a space for debate. We shall exchange knowledge, experiences, clinical experiences, analyze results of different research projects. We shall also continue to speak about the early diagnosis and how important it is, and the investment in research, because we know that without this research, there is no treatment for us. Thirdly, this conference brings together the history of these glycogen storage diseases, glucogenoses, and this history refers to perseverance, the world of research, and the doctors, the healthcare practitioners. And thanks to their devotion of researchers, physicians, and the tenacity of patients and the support from their families, then during these last years, we have seen important breakthroughs occur, highly significant breakthroughs and developments. We are rowing all in the same direction. We are walking in the same direction. This conference, which we are inaugurating today, reflects that together, yes, we may walk together. We may continue moving mountains, that it be a fruitful forum for learning, for inspiration, and above all, of hope. And next, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Alejandra Fuentes, President of the Spanish Association of Pompe disease. Good afternoon to one and all. It is an honor for me to welcome you to this 16th International Conference. This time, along with the Spanish Association of Glucogenosis and the Spanish Association of Pompe patients. This is a conference where, during these next 2 days, we shall meet with patients, families, healthcare practitioners, researchers, and representatives from different organizations. They all together have the aim to go forward with the visibility of disease, its treatment, and everything about it. From the Pompe Association, we'd like to thank the Getafe Hospital for having given us this space for our conference and other spaces for our evaluations, and Sanofi, Amicus, and Estellas for their very essential report to make this conference possible. Their commitment with research and the development of new treatments are a key for all of us. And of course, I should like to thank each and every one of you for being here. This conference is an occasion to be able to share experiences, scientific developments and breakthroughs, and above all to strengthen the bonds which bring us together. We know it is not easy to live with a rare disease such as Pompe, with glucogenosis, because this involves many challenges. And of course, these meetings are so important because from here we listen, we learn, we empathize, and we give support. Thanks to our joint work from different professionals, researchers, associations, and patients, we are one step closer to improving the quality of life of those who live with this disease. In order to conclude, I would like to encourage you to participate, to exchange experiences, to ask questions, to share experiences, and to keep on weaving this network of cooperation, which is this huge family of Pompe patients. Thank you for being with us in the 16th conference. We hope, and I personally, as president of the Pompe Patient Association, that it be fruitful and give hope to all of us. Welcome.
Tiene la palabra don.
And now Mr. Jesús Sueiro has the floor. He's the president of the Spanish Association of Glucogenosis Patients. Thank you so much. I would also like to welcome all of you who are coming to this conference, the associate patients and everyone. We all have huge expectations placed in this, and we know that the board has worked very hard to organize this, so it is inevitable to, of course, have to thank the Getafe Hospital. And the word hospital also it shares the word hospitality, so this hospital is giving us their hospitality. So I would like to thank them so much. Of course. Also, the appreciation means that we should also recognize the work done by the board of directors. Jordi, María, Lande, Paula, Juan Diego, Marta. We think that everyone who has one of these diseases also has to take care of their family members, because sometimes there is a lack of hope, and to devote time to take care of people and to also organize these meetings is to be deeply appreciated and is certainly merit-worthy. We also must realize how important some of our associates do. Santiago's family, cooperating with their town hall to try to, they have meetings to help fund this meeting. And we think that we should also look in this mirror so that amongst all of us, we be able to look for resources to be able to create our family, a family of patients who have these very rare diseases. Of course, thank you to our sponsors, Amicus, Therapeutics, Astellas, Beam. I would like to say that thank them so much because, as Fernando said, this is certainly not an easy task. I should just like to give thought to how important associations are, patient associations particularly. Haddadi said that the human species was able to dominate the planet Homo sapiens not because of their intelligence, and their strength, of course not, but their intelligence when they create networks, associations, shall we say. This is what leads to these networks that make it possible for us to make strides ahead, to think and to create initiatives so that the species in this moment, so that research stride ahead. We've always wanted to establish these types of networks with doctors, researchers, healthcare practitioners, and social workers, because by giving our work and giving our time and helping others, then this is all the better. And when we want to analyze a given case, it's anecdotal. A researcher and the plural of anecdote are not data, but what is important is to generate a critical number to reach conclusions. In the same way, clinicians, when they treat a rare disease, as we know so well, when we know the word rare refers to something that is infrequent. So to bring patients together, in our national healthcare system, for example, we have our reference centers. And so that's why it's important to contribute our ability to so that we're association and these doctors can have more experience by treating patients and in that way render a better service to our patients, because this is what we're interested in the end. Let us not forget about that we help patients who have these diseases, because it just isn't fair, actually. And truly, no one is able to say that in order for a person to, if you have to do twice as much as anyone else, more than a person who doesn't have one of these diseases. And we have centers in Burgos who give us a lot of support, and I hope we meet there next year. We can all be together there. I do not want to be heavy-going and talk too much. I'd just like to welcome you again, and we hope that we are able to, we hope that you will be, your expectations will be reached. Thank you to the Getafe University Hospital for welcoming us in their facilities, and we appreciate this much. Mrs. Nuria García Montes, who is the medical director, and now she has the floor. Good afternoon, dear Celia, Director of Monitoring, and Alejandra Fuentes, President of the Spanish Association of Pompe Patients, Jesús Sueiro, President of the Spanish Association of Glycogen patients, and also welcome to the patients' families and researchers and healthcare practitioners from all specialties involved. From the Getafe University Hospital, it's a pleasure to welcome you here in this 16th meeting, which is going to be a meeting point for the people who are highly committed to these rare diseases. For 2 days, we're going to have top professionals who are going to speak about basic research up to the clinical daily practice by addressing daily care of the professionals and the patients. We shall also look at nutrition, exercise, breathing, heart, and biomarkers, support therapies for gene therapy. Our hospital has always been characterized by enhancing these type of multidisciplinary meetings, says it's one of the most useful tools to promote knowledge and better care. And besides, I'm particularly pleased with the way everyone is going to participate, because the organization has told me that the people who have this and their families will be given the opportunity to share with us what they really would like to say. It's very important to hear this in order to stride ahead. We want to improve the quality of life of these patients. This is an initiative which is in line with our strategic plan 2025 to 2030. We are working hard to improve the care for patients, but also we want to give voice to our patients who are a priority for us. And our hospital will participate also in the first session. We will speak about breathing problems and respiratory involvement. We have José María Díaz from the Department of Pneumology, and he will speak about the role of this specialist in the evolution and the treatment of these pathologies. And besides this, we are in a hospital that has a very relevant role in the diagnosis of another rare disease, such as another diseases, and these are the glass bones disease. And this has been one of the first centers in Spain to treat osteogenosis imperfecta. And so this is we have worked hard in this, and we have had excellent results, and we're a reference internationally. And we have pediatrics, traumatology, radiology, anesthesia, rehabilitation, genetics, endocrino, cardiology, pneumology, ENT. Many professionals are involved in the development of better healthcare for our patients. And besides this unit, with a unit that is based on high resolution, has a specific protocol, which is especially prepared by our professionals for our patients. And so, before being admitted, all of these tests and appointments are made so that the patient will know when to come back. And so we want to make it easy for the patient and for the family. And I hope that the high scientific level, technical level, and the approach of all of these issues and panel sessions will enable you to stride ahead and share information which will lead to improvements for health care given to the patients as well as their quality of life in glucogenosis as well as Pompe disease. Thank you very much.
And now, to do the final inauguration, I thank you for your presence. Mrs. Celia García Hernández, General Director of Humanity Care and Patient Safety for the local government of Madrid. Good afternoon. It is an honor to welcome you, all of you, at the 16th International Meeting of Storage Diseases and Pompe's disease, as organized by the Spanish Association of Pompes and the Spanish Association of Glycogen Storage Disease, and addressing professionals, patients, families, and institutional representatives. I'm sorry, I apologize. I have a hoarse voice. We're catching diseases. I've just had a cold or even the flu, I don't know, and I get a coughing fit. I'm sorry. Well, as I was saying, the patients themselves, the family, the caregivers, and healthcare professionals and institutional representatives all together. And myself, of course, as part of the healthcare local government with the aim of contributing to research in this disease. We do this at an outstanding hospital, the University Hospital of Getafe. And thank you for your hospitality, because it showcases to the best the commitment to integral holistic healthcare being provided to rare diseases. So a very special appreciation to Medical Director Dr. Nuria García Montes. And of course, we also thank the Spanish Association of Pompe's Disease, Mrs. Alejandra Fuentes, and the President of the Storage Diseases, Mr. Jesús Sueiro, for the participation. It's true that they have already stated that once the organization is ongoing, we don't fully realize how very much work is behind it. And an international meeting calls for huge dedication and effort. An international organization is very difficult to coordinate all the speakers, coordinating interpretation. Congratulations. And besides, it's the 16th meeting, so you have a long history behind you. Congratulations to all the organizers. And thank you very much to all the national and foreign speakers. They are expert speakers. They do have the expertise and knowledge, and they know what they are talking about. Every time they heed our summons, prepare their presentation. So thank you. Thank you very much for devoting your generously so much time, to devoting your time so generously to improve upon our knowledge. And a very special hello to all the people affected from this pathology, present or streaming, together with the families, the patients' associations, and all of you who are creating this community you were mentioning, a community that allows, on the one hand, to work together towards a cure and, of course, promote the very much needed research, and also to accompany during hard times, share knowledge and share rays of hope. We are going to listen to the latest advancements, and we shall try to look with a positive attitude towards the future, so that you have a full quality of life as you deserve. Glycogen storage disease, of course, you know about them, are dealing with glycogen storage problems, and Pompe is one of them. Pompe is a rare disease, infrequent minority diseases, rare diseases, and it expresses what they truly are. There's very few patients. In this case, the prevalence of this disease doesn't even reach 1 per 100,000. It's 0.38 per 100,000 inhabitants. May present itself in infancy, childhood, and even if it is of an adult onset presentation, it does lead to problems. We have a reporting system for rare diseases in the community of Madrid and a registry. All the associations always call for registry because, after all, you need to know how many cases of your disease are for adequate decision making, and we need to know how many people are affected. In the last report of our CIRMA registry, the local registry of the region of Madrid, as of January 23, of course, making ready the information is always lagging behind. We had 20 cases of Pompe's disease at the community of Madrid, where we are. You have a national meeting, and of course, you have information of all cases at a national level. And of them, more than half were males, were men, at least as of January 2023. Now there are many research lines under development. Hopefully, gene therapy is moving forward. You begin to see some light in being shed on the tunnel. They're advancing very quickly, and there are some gene therapies and combination therapies that enhance the efficacy of ERT that is being used until now, so as to prolong survivorship and slow down the progression of the disease, and especially improve the quality of life. And the program you have prepared, we will have this opportunity to gain a deeper understanding in the most recent scientific findings. Those are not yet published. That's the positive thing of listening to them with advanced therapies, biomarkers, and the multidisciplinary approach, which is so important because the people affected from these rare diseases need a holistic approach. You have organized workshops on other questions, nutrition, physical exercise. That may be irrelevant when you don't suffer a disease, but when you do, it is actually very relevant to be careful with the nutrition, the diet you follow, so that to have the best impact on our evolution, the type of physical exercise to be performed. And I know you're going to work on support networks. As Jesús said, associations are very important. I encourage you to join associations. Not only you support each other, you also support the healthcare system and the administration, because you provide those resources that we still cannot provide, and yet you help the family and the people affected. So thank you very much indeed for your work. In the local community of Madrid, we are encouraging people to become members, to reach them and put them in contact with the associations. And that's the way to reach the global aim of the improvement in quality of life. In Madrid, as you know, we have a healthcare plan for rare diseases. The second plan has been published this year. We had already finished with the first strategic plan. The first one was until this year, and the next one will be projected towards 2028 in close collaboration with the patients themselves, the family, the associations of all rare diseases, FEDER, joining most of the rare diseases, and many different rare diseases, because we cannot cope with strategies, in the development of our healthcare centers if we don't take into account your true needs. We need to get you on board so as to decide the improvements that you truly require and that are truly appropriate to evolve to the best of your ability. You have to tell us so as to enhance research in a joint basis, early diagnosis, the healthcare pathways, improvement and streamlining, and all those many issues and questions that we just don't realize. So we need you to call our attention on these matters and issues that we simply hadn't realized so far. We think that with this strategic plan, we shall enhance the neonatal screening programs. We're enlarging in the community of Madrid the neonatal tests with the heel prick tests that are going to increase the battery of tests. We are, of course, reinforcing specialized units as in the hospitals La Paz or 12 de Octubre that deal with glycogen storage diseases with an integral and multidisciplinary approach, and also enhance the support networks, and not only at national level, but to further coordination with international networks so that we can all be on top of the latest research. As we were saying before, in rare diseases, research is very difficult. It is very difficult to gather sufficient number of people for research. So given the possibilities of the digital era that we enjoy today for networking internationally, we'll be able to move forward in this matter. I'm sure that this meeting today and tomorrow will be very fruitful. And of course, they have been in the past, because otherwise you wouldn't be holding the 16th meeting. So I encourage you to participate, to ask your questions, listen, of course, pay attention, so that amongst all of us we can implement the measures that you truly need, and we may help each other so that you fulfill your life with high quality and give you quality treatment to overcome the symptoms, and especially looking towards the future where there will be a true curative disease in the future. We will no longer be worried about the disease because you will have a therapy available. Okay, thank you very much for having invited me. I wish you the best, and that's it. We officially inaugurated the meeting, because what's important is to listen to you and the speakers. Thank you very much.
Gracias por acompañarnos.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for accompanying us, and all of you for your attendance. Thank you very much to all the professionals and speakers that will be with us during these 2 days. And of course, our sponsors, Sanofi, Amicus, Astellas, and Beam Therapeutics that support us and make this Congress possible. And thank you. Now, we shall proceed without any further ado, the first presentation. Just a few seconds and we'll start. Está haciendo
Vamos a dar paso a la.
We're going to begin our first panel session for this conference. It is called "The Weakness of Respiratory Muscles is Certainly a Serious Problem in Neuromuscular Diseases. Its detection and early treatment are aspects which are so essential to mitigate the morbidity. In glycogenosis and in Pompe disease, there might be a respiratory compromise that is important, which often defines the quality of life and the prognosis of the patient. This respiratory involvement requires a proactive multidisciplinary approach from the very beginning, from the diagnosis. In this particular panel session, which is entitled Respiratory Involvement in Neuromuscular Diseases, we have Dr. Bárbara Smith from the University of Florida. We have Dr. Ana Hernández from the 12th of Octubre Hospital in Madrid, and Dr. José María Díaz from the University Hospital here in Getafe. And now we would like to give him the floor.
Storage disease, GSD.
It's better to sit.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, one and all. I'm José María Díaz García. I'm a pneumologist, and I work at the Getafe University Hospital. And I firstly should like to thank the organizers and all of the people who have contributed to this conference for giving me the possibility to speak before you. My role is to speak about the role of the pneumologist, and I would like to speak about our role in neuromuscular diseases. I should like to begin with a brief thought given to something which we see every day, about 21,600 times, as a matter of fact, and most frequently we are not aware of this. It refers to breathing, and no one knows what one has until one loses it. In 2020, the pandemic came, and with that many losses, we had coronavirus, made us realize what it meant to lose breathing ability. Why am I speaking about this in a neuromuscular disease speech? Because the people who are listening to us, this sensation of loss of breathing ability was not temporary, that just lasted 2 years, but this is a reality, an everyday reality. Unfortunately, in the evolution of many neuromuscular diseases, there is an important loss which does not go unknown, and this is breathing. We know, furthermore, that the main cause of death in these patients is breathing failure, hence this lecture. What do we know about neuromuscular diseases? Because these is a heterogeneous group of more than 400 types of diseases, and they may maybe occur from birth, or they may be developed throughout life. And here we may classify this into these diseases depending upon the area which is involved. We have one group, this is one group, another Pompe, another GSD are in the metabolic myotonies. And here the pneumologist must evaluate these patients and perform a follow-up. Who does this? The Spanish Association of Pneumology, in its regulation, refers to that the approach of these patients should be multidisciplinary, and the pneumologist should be one of the members of this team. And so in all of these neuromuscular patients, regardless of the fact that there are or not symptoms, there must be pulmonary function tests, and one must monitor this to see if there will be an involvement in the future. This not only happens in Spain, but also in the European guidelines and American guidelines. They refer to this need. What does a pneumologist do? He does, or she, they do all of these things. Firstly, we check the patient. We have a clinical history. We do the examinations. We'll do tests to see if there's respiratory involvement. Depending upon the results, there will be one or another treatment given, and this will be coordinated with the other specialists for a multidisciplinary approach to have a correct follow-up of these patients. And what do the patients tell us about when they come to see us in our doctor's office? Well, they tell about sleep problems, and after having slept time enough, it's not a repairing sleep. they still have they have a morning headache. They can't breathe very well. They have a weak toe, as I say, kind of a weak toe cough, and then say they have problems spitting and bringing up phlegm. So this is due to the respiratory muscles. We have the inspiratory, expiratory. Here on the chart we see each one in these different colors. And here I should like to mention that the diaphragm is the most important muscle in inspiration because this accounts for 70% of this. If we focus on the inspiratory muscles, a neuromuscular patient might have a weakness in these. This will lead to a difficulty for lung expansion. Consequently, well, what's going to happen? The muscles are going to have to work more so. And also it will lead to exhaustion. And this will lead to hypoventilation or respiratory failure. What is this? CO2 that the patient should breathe out. When he breathes out, it accumulates in the blood. And this is precisely what's going to lead to the symptoms which we observed before. So furthermore, these inspiratory muscles also can have a weakness. This will mean that the cough will be weak. The patient will not be able to bring out his excretions and mucus. And this will lead to mucus getting stuck, problems with sputum and the like. We might also see an involvement of we can have the involvement of the tongue, the pharynx, the larynx, and there might be swallowing problems leading to dysphagia. And so the patient will not be able to acquire these nutrients because they will not go into his food because the food will go directly into the lungs. And this will lead to infections and also mucus getting stuck there. And what do we pneumologists do here if there's a muscle involvement or not? Firstly, we have spirometry, which is a test which we see in the neuromuscular patients. We spy about the inspiratory muscles. This will be done sitting as well as lying down because there might be an important drop if the person is lying down. And this patient, this diaphragm is not working correctly. If there's a drop of the forced vital capacity in it 20%. And also we have PIM and PIM, and this refers to the inspiratory musculature, and then we also have the expiratory musculature. And we also evaluate cough. This is a mechanism which has 3 phases. The first phase, the patient takes in air. Secondly, the muscles are going to squeeze that air, and then this air will be pressurized and expulsed. How do we see this with this voice? We have a cough flow, peak flow device. And so there is cough, and so we have values, and the values under 270 show us that cough is weak, and we should use a drainage technique, which we shall see later on. We have imaging techniques to evaluate the respiratory muscles. Ultrasound is there to help us. And look at this diaphragm. On one hand, we can see the movement here. We don't know if you can see this. Anyway, there's a diagram. The diaphragm is in pearly gray, and underneath we see the movement that the diaphragm makes with exhaling, inhale, and the like. And so the phrenic nerve is that which causes the contraction of the diaphragm. That will mean that it's going to work correctly or not. We see movements, but we can also see the thickness of the diaphragm. So when a diaphragm works correctly, the first thing is that we see the true thickness of the diaphragm. It's not thinned, how it thickens when we tell the patient to inhale. And so we have points 1 and 2 here, and the difference in centimeters is greater at that point 2 because it's thickening. It's getting wider because the patient is inhaling. And so we see if there's an involvement or not. Also, it's very important in our patients to evaluate sleeping disorders. Why? Because 1, they are frequent. 2, they are going to lead to a weakness in muscle weakness. And also, this refers to the fact that leads to a deterioration in the quality of life of these patients, and this will be a prognosis for these patients. Why? Because this predicts respiratory failure during daytime. What is this due to? Before there's respiratory failure during the daytime, it must exist at nighttime during the sleep period. Sleep phases. The first thing is that we're awake, and then we will go to sleep. So then we're going to delve into each of the following phases, and sleep will be a repair sleep, and muscles will relax. Instead of being wakefulness, we will go to phase 1 is superficial sleep. Then we go on to this superficial sleep is stabilized, then a more deep sleep, it repairs, but more important, muscle weakness, and then we reach the REM phase. This is the last one. Here, the brain, it kind of shuts off, it disconnects the muscles except for the diaphragm, because we would not even survive our first phase of sleep if it weren't for the diaphragm. So these are neuromuscular diseases. Now, what problem do we mainly see with these patients during the sleep phase? Neuromuscular patients, well, hypoventilation. Well, there's an increase in the amount of CO2, and there's a drop in the oxygen level at nighttime. These two problems are due to the respiratory muscles being involved. And then we have apnea and hypoapnea, and this has to do with the pharynx and larynx muscles. And so the air does not go down, and so the oxygen is reduced, and this leads to a disruption of sleep. It breaks the architecture, and so this is a sleep that does not repair. What benefits will we see if we can correct these sleep disorders? Firstly, we shall improve the quality of life of our patients. We'll reduce this fatigue. The daytime fatigue will improve the cognitive function and what they do in their everyday lives. We shall avoid being admitted to hospitals. These can be very serious, and we shall prolong the life of our patients. How are we going to evaluate this? Here we have some sleep studies, but there are many more. Some are simple, what we see on the top, and more complex, as we see on the bottom. I'm going to focus on the ones on the bottom. This is the respiratory polygraphy. And using sensors, we're able to see different variables. The first that we have up on the top here is the snore. There are snore peaks during the nighttime of this patient. And the second to the bottom is the flow, green, respiratory flow of our patient. And underneath in yellow and in blue, these are the movements made by the chest and the abdomen with our bands that we have on the image. And lastly, in order to see the oxygen and the heart rate. So we see that this patient has a snore peak, and then there's a drop. There's a flattening in the respiratory flow of our patient. The movement of the chest and the abdomen seem to be different than before. And there is a drop in the oxygenation. There's a desaturation, in other words, and with the sleep apnea at night, and this is breaking this quality of sleep of our patients. Furthermore, we have the polysomnography. These very same meters, sensors as the polygraphy, they're more complex because they give us an electroencephalographic registry. And we see the sleep phases that we were referring to before. On the upper right-hand side, we see if the patient is awake. Then N1, it's phase 1. We referred to that. It's the superficial sleep, N2 and 3. And then we reach the REM phase, which is this little rectangle in blue. So this is a sleep cycle. And the patient on the bottom here, we see also a sleep study with a polysomnography, but this patient we hear, awake or not, but we see that he wakes up much more than the patient on the top. And in the REM phase, which is the little black rectangle, we correspond that to the chart on the bottom, there's a drop in the oxygen levels. And this is because this patient most likely has a respiratory failure, and this happens during the REM phase when this muscles shut down. And what happens in Pompe and other GSDs? In Pompe, we know that this weakness with breathing is more early on, and it's more serious than other GSDs. Why is this? Because not only there is a muscle commitment, but also there is an involvement of the neurons. This leads to the respiratory failure. Furthermore, the sleep disorders will be frequent. And this might be the first manifestation of this sleep failure, hence the importance to study this. And then we look at the secretions. These are frequent problems. They're the sputum and the secretion drainage, and this is a problem with the GSDs. And here we'll do the tests, and depending upon the determinations, then we see, for example, well, we can have a BiPAP, for example. And here I'm summing up the treatments. There are many, and I'm going to focus on these 4. The first of all would be non-invasive ventilation BiPAP. I put this picture up here because when there's respiratory failure, this is the king of the chess game. And this here, there cannot be non-invasive ventilation because we will not be able to continue the game. This is absolutely of utmost importance. It's vital. Then we have the care assistance, and we have coughing devices, and we can have CPAP. It's just for the patients who have apneas or the like, and they don't have a respiratory failure. And then we would have oxygen therapy. That can lead to this respiratory failure. Non-invasive ventilation has evolved considerably since 1928, when we saw the iron lung, which was the first respirator. We saw this during the polio epidemic. It's evolved till 2025. And look at this. The devices, the size has been reduced considerably. We don't need to put the patient inside. We can put it on the bedside table, and it just takes up a small amount of space. And what does this give to us? It improves survival of our patients, their quality of life, and their cognitive functions. These symptoms which they tell us about at the doctor's office and the sleep quality are going to be much better. And this will prevent going into the hospital, which can be important. This has evolved, and so now we have telemonitoring. And this is an information system with remote control, where we can see from our computer there at the hospital all of these data about how this non-invasive ventilation is functioning in our patients, how many hours they're using it, if they have problems, if the air comes out, or in other data. And this will enable us to change the configuration of the device, and remotely we can look at the parameters without the patient having to come to our doctor's office. And this helps with the follow-up, the tolerance, and the comfort of our patients. And secretion drainage. Basically, we have 2 techniques. One would be the mechanical techniques, which would be the cough assistant machine. And then we see if we have a phase where the air goes in. And then we have another phase. It generates negative pressure, and the patient will be coordinated to cough, and then those secretions will go up, and we'll be able to, so they don't become infected, we can bring them out. We have manual techniques, and the expert will be the physiotherapist, and it's very important to use this in these patients. What does all of this give to us? It reduces the risk of respiratory infections, which may be very serious, improve the clearance of these secretions, and prevent serious respiratory complications. And furthermore, we would avoid being hospitalized. The pneumologist is one member of the team. He alone is not of utmost importance. The value is thanks to the entire group of specialists, and there's a multidisciplinary approach of all of these patients. And I should like to conclude with some sentences. The pandemic made all of us understand, even though just a little bit, our daily struggle or fight. In this struggle, you're not alone. The pneumologist is that travel companion whose aim is to be the scaffold which sustains your breathing. And we're here to anticipate, to give you tools that will help you not only survive, but also to live with quality. And you have taught us something very important. When one loses something, one can find a new way to value it, to find a new way to fight, because life is not just measured due to the lung capacity, but the courage with which one experiences with each breath taken. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking with you at the Glucogenosis Conference of 2025. I'm Barbara Smith. I'm a physiotherapist by training, and so today I'd like to take maybe a rehabilitation perspective on respiratory function, respiratory strength in Pompe disease, but maybe there was a little something that even if you don't have Pompe disease, then maybe you can carry out of the room with you today. As I was preparing this talk, I could not help but reflect back on the many, many years that we've been able to learn and interact with you here in the AEEG, AEEP conferences. Time certainly does march on, and so while we might not look exactly the same as we do, maybe a few more silver hairs or maybe a little taller in the picture here, there are things, there's maybe some universal principles that I think applied then and apply now and that we can discuss. We'll talk a little bit about effects of time, effects of age, effects of neuromuscular conditions on force generation, especially respiratory force. We'll look at changes in respiratory strength and function with time right here in the people who come to this conference and the things we're learning from you and sharing with you. We'll talk about how the respiratory muscles work, the types of behaviors that they engage in, and then look at maybe how we can optimize respiratory muscles to work over time. And so, as we begin, I'd like to talk about sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is muscle loss. It's a generalized, progressive disorder of skeletal muscle. And it's associated with loss of strength, number one. That's our biomarker for determining whether an individual has sarcopenia. Also, changes in muscle quality, loss of muscle quantity, muscle atrophy, and resulting eventually in impaired muscle performance. And so we can see in the picture that over the course of our life, our strength will change with time, right? There will be a time earlier in our life where we have our best strength, our best function that we'll have. And then in our adult life, we hope to try to maintain that. We're going to try to hold steady. We reach a point in our older life where we will lose strength. Time will catch up with us. But our goal at that point in our life is to minimize loss, to have a nice, slow, easy progression into older aging. There are different factors that can contribute to sarcopenia, to that threshold of muscle weakness. Some we cannot control. We cannot change the age. We cannot change the calendar. We can't change whether we have a neuromuscular condition or an autoimmune condition or arthritic condition. But other factors are modifiable. We can change our physical activity. We can change sedentary behavior and time where we are not engaged in activity. And we can optimize our nutrition. Now, I'm a physiotherapist. I am not prepared to speak to you about nutrition today, but we can talk a little bit about physical activity, and I think that would be helpful. Now, when we look at aging, this applies to all of us, right? We are all going to be affected by time and older age eventually. There are certain body system changes happen. We will see the elasticity in the lungs, reduce the rigidity in our chest wall and in our muscles that surround the chest wall. Those will become more rigid. And then the clearance of mucus, that will decrease. And so we will, over the course of time, the volumes that we take in into our lungs, and then the ability to produce an effective cough, those will decrease. From a neurological perspective, aging is associated with neuronal loss, whether or not we have Pompe disease. And so in addition, we see a slower response time, a slower reaction time. So all of us will be susceptible to weakness and risk for falls as we age. Again, from a musculoskeletal standpoint, the regenerative capacity of the muscle fibers diminishes. We develop atrophy of certain muscle fiber types, and then we get less efficient. The engines of the muscle cells become less efficient. So what does that mean? It means we lose power, we lose strength over time. We don't generate as much energy from the muscle fibers, and it takes longer to recover if we become injured. Now, when we look at multi-system effects of Pompe, the mechanism might be different because of the disease, but the functional consequences are the same, okay? So all of us are working to optimize our lung volumes, optimize our cough function, preserve our strength, and preserve our ability to recover from injury. Let's use that understanding of aging. There's a very, very deep and broad research on aging as maybe a model that we can use to preserve function in Pompe disease. We saw in our very excellent first lecture that we have different muscle groups that drive the action of breathing in, that help guide forced exhalation, and there are many respiratory muscles. Anything that can change the configuration of the thorax and change the volume of the lungs contained within inside of the thorax can function as a respiratory muscle. So multiple respiratory muscles, of course, they're involved in breathing, they're involved in airway clearance, but respiratory muscles also have, I don't know, maybe a little side job, okay? So they moonlight on the weekends. Respiratory muscles engage in helping preserve the core in the middle. And also they help maintain airway patency with sleeping. So I want to show you, many of you who are participants in the longitudinal muscle testing that we do year to year here at the conference. Want to show you some data looking at maximal inspiratory pressure on the y-axis, up and down, and then age over the course of the x-axis, going from left to right. And so we want to look at how inspiratory strength changes as a function of age. Now, this combines everybody. This combines whether you had newborn screening, whether you were diagnosed in middle age, whether you are on or off enzyme replacement therapy, whether you have early onset or later onset disease. So it's a little messy, I understand. But we wanted to look at the course of time. And indeed, in this group, we do see an early peak, and then as we age over the decades, that we see that maximal inspiratory pressure does indeed change. Now, there was within the past year, there was a lovely bit of research that came out of Spain that identified reference values for these very tests from people residing in Spain. Over 600 individuals participated in this study. And so what we can see, let's see, the green is the female and the brown is the male. For each decade, we see there's a little bit of a progressive decline. These are the thresholds where we'd like everybody to be. Okay, so we can see that as we maybe move into later decades, we'd like everybody to be at or above those bars. Those are the optimal numbers we want to stay above. And in some cases we are, many cases we are, in other cases we're not. But over time, that's the direction that we're hoping to achieve, to preserve that function. When we look at how expiratory strength changes with aging, we do tend to see that expiratory strength is greater naturally than inspiratory strength. That's just how we're built, how we're wired. And so again, we see an early peak that declines over the course of time. And in our reference set, okay, unaffected individuals of the same age group, we see that expiratory function is maybe a little bit better preserved over the decades, which is nice to see. Now, I think we can also look back. It may require a little bit of imagination on your part, because my computer wouldn't do this for me. My graphics program, I'm not very good. Maybe I need AI to help me. But so what we'd like to see is what's called a trend line, where we can see in the middle of our data set what's happening. And we see that nice big early peak. But I don't know. I think I see maybe a smaller slope that happens early and kind of comes down a little early as well. We see it in expiratory. There we go. We see it in inspiratory. We see that little smaller peak happening earlier in the teens to 20s and then declining a little bit more earlier. And so I've not done a distinction to see if those are our earlier onset patients or whether it's individuals who maybe had a critical illness earlier in their life. But it does appear that we have two distinct trajectories in this data set. Okay, I also want to show you lung volume, and we can measure lung volume in liters. We can also express lung volume as a percent of what would be expected for your sex, for your age, for your height, for your race, and so that's what we've graphed here. We've factored all of those things in, and so 100% would be closest to, ideal condition, and we're looking to, in our testing, we'd like to keep people as close to 80 or above as we can. And we do a pretty good job of that, but again, with aging and Pompe disease, we might lose a little bit of that function as we progress into later decades, as some of those muscle function changes become more apparent to us. So we ideally want to try to slow that decline in those later decades, okay? So when we're on the decreasing slope, we want to keep that slope as small as possible. So to preserve, we really want to leverage the many different roles of the respiratory muscles. Now, respiratory muscles, for example, the diaphragm, they can act like specialists. They're very good at helping us to preserve breathing. But they can function more as generalists because they're also associated with the trunk, with the upper limb, with the shoulder and pelvis girdles, and so they serve a postural role as well. They serve also with extremity force production. And so we can use some of those secondary roles of the respiratory muscles as another way to help strengthen those muscles, okay? So we can work on the specialist role of the respiratory muscles and do very specific respiratory training. This was a recent, it was a study that put together all of the existing literature on respiratory strength training in people with Pompe disease. So it looked at six respiratory exercise studies. There were 31 people, 2 had infantile onset diagnosis. And what we see in this figure, called a forest plot, it shows changes in strength on each one of the different studies. And then the bottom one weights each of the studies. So it gives a weight to each of the individual studies and comes up with a composite score. And what we saw with composite changes from all these studies, composite changes in inspiratory strength, it was significant, okay? So respiratory strength training helped inspiratory strength, also helped expiratory strength. It looks like it also does some improvement to cough function, but not every study looked at coughing. And so the numbers of people that could be added to the composite score was pretty small, but it looks like it might be helpful. We didn't see in the meta-analysis, the combination where 6-minute walk distance or reported fatigue changed. What did change was reported physical function in quality of life questionnaires. So people felt like they could do more physically. They still got pretty tired though. Okay, we've also found, these are some pretty small studies, we've found that respiratory training is feasible even in individuals who maybe have a little bit more advanced disease, who use the ventilator during the daytime period, for example, who may have a tracheostomy. And so even with a lower baseline function, it's safe. We see very few, if any, adverse events. They're typically mild. Things like muscle soreness. Well, when we work a muscle that we don't use, often it gets sore initially. That's part of the process of making more muscle. Now, with lower baseline function, it takes a little bit longer to see appreciable gains in strength. So we have to be a little bit more patient, a little bit more persistent. There are also in recent years maybe some alternative strengthening modes that have appeared in the literature, perhaps electrical stimulation, perhaps diaphragm pacing for the right individuals. We suggest that individuals who have more advanced disease have supervision, that they use a perceived exertion scale so that they can understand the intensity of the exercise that they're engaged in, and that they be taught how to monitor their vital signs or have an individual help them who can. So this is another study that came out just in the past couple of years, looking at targeted resistance exercise. So we're doing strength training, we're doing weight training. And it was just a small feasibility study. It looked at individuals who were taking a maintenance enzyme replacement therapy, and then they added resistance exercise on top of their usual enzyme therapy for 24 weeks, so about 6 months. Individuals came 3 times a week. They got the resistance training done with a trainer. So 3 exercises were the focus. Curling the arm, okay, straightening the leg. This is show and tell here. You even get a demonstration. And inspiratory training, so focused respiratory strengthening exercise. Results were each of those areas saw significant gains in strength. This group also saw faster walking on the 6-minute walking test that many of you I know have done many times. There were a few adverse events. They were pretty minor. Again, soreness in the muscles that were getting strengthened, okay? And those were typically mild and transient in nature, okay? All right, so when developing a strength training protocol, we really want to make sure we include a sufficient load to challenge the muscle. We want to make sure that the exercise targets the muscle that we want to get stronger. If we give an arm exercise, we shouldn't expect the foot to get stronger, okay? And then we have to continue to do it. The principle of reversibility. The gains only last as long as we do the work. Then we go back to our baseline. And then finally, the improvement we get, the rate of improvement, that can differ based upon our age, our sex, the type of condition that we might have, and then other factors like genetics. Now, the World Health Organization has guidelines for every individual age 5 and older on physical activity, okay, for health, for preserving health. In children, 5 to 17, they should get at least 60 minutes of physical activity, typically aerobic, running around, wheeling around, and more activity gives more benefit. Adults, age 18 to 64 years, it's recommended that 150 minutes of moderate physical activity occur every week. And so that's about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That can be walking around your neighborhood, walking to the bus station. That can be doing yoga. That can be doing whatever physical activity you like to do, along with muscle strengthening 2 days a week to preserve strength. Older adults, the guidelines are the same, with the exception, the acknowledgement that we're a little more concerned about neurologic changes, and so we want an additional balance exercise a few times a week. These can be done for individuals with Pompe disease, without Pompe disease, all of us who are getting older in this room, okay? And if you can't meet what the World Health Organization recommends, they want to assure all of us that it's okay, that anything you do, okay, is better than doing nothing. Any physical activity will yield a health benefit. So I want to give you one final study, because this was a neat study. It was an exercise study, and it happened a long time ago, 2011. So about when the first glucogenosis meeting was happening, almost. It was an exercise study looking at people with later onset Pompe disease, ambulatory, and divided them into exercise versus no exercise. And checked in with them 10 years later, found that people who were able to maintain their physical activity after completing the study had higher physical fitness at the 10-year mark, and they had greater muscle strength at the 10-year mark. Now, there weren't differences in the people who were active versus inactive in the disease duration, the use of ERT, body mass index, age, or use of ambulatory or breathing support. So it wasn't the fact that it wasn't that people were more active because they had less functional impact from their disease. They were just more active, okay? Now, reasons that people gave for not maintaining their physical activity were that, wow, it takes a lot of time. So time is a problem sometimes. Also, they felt that it was difficult to maintain the intensity and the frequency of the study exercise plan, and that they needed more professional guidance to help them continue on outside of the study. So I would suggest, I know some of you, I don't know all of you, but if you're looking to exercise, to find something that would be compatible with your goals, whether you want to get stronger, whether you want to improve your posture or your flexibility or your balance. There are different types of physical activity you can engage in, okay? The best exercise, though, is the one that you will do regularly, okay? So that's the best one for you. So putting all these pieces together, optimize breathing function over time, exercise training is just one piece of this. So really, when it comes to breathing, exercise is medicine. If you remember nothing else, exercise is medicine. All right, thank you.
Bueno, seguimos con las charlas.
Let us continue with our lectures. I'm the third. I'm Ana Hernández. I'm a pneumologist. I've met you at other meetings. I come from the 12th of October Hospital in Madrid. And having listened to the theoretical part and the part on rehabilitation, I shall refer to the studies which have been carried out in Spain. Many of you have participated in these studies. As a matter of fact, I shall speak about the respiratory studies that we've performed in Spain these last few years. And I'm going to refer to Pompe, and the second is a second respiratory study. The Pompe is a study which concluded this summer, of which we are very proud. It's called Prevalence of Myopathy due to late onset Pompe disease, patients with a diagnosis of a neuromuscular respiratory idiopathic alteration. And so they've come with his neuromuscular problems, which was considered to be idiopathic because we had not been able to reach a diagnosis and to find something and that one would have Pompe disease. This is highly significant for us because almost no pathology has a treatment, and this one does, with which this was highly important. This study was begun in 2018, more or less. No, we began in 2022, and the idea was 2 years of study. We'd have to lengthen it to have more information. This is a multicentric study. It's transversal. It's 2 years long. It's 2022 to 2024. We prolonged it 1 more year. We have just closed it down in summer in June, as a matter of fact, at our conference. The aim of the study was to study I was looking for a pointer. Well, the aim of this study is to study the possible occult cases of Pompe disease with respiratory involvement with neuromuscular profile of the population. Was all of the patients who had a respiratory involvement with neuromuscular profile with mechanical ventilation, or were in a follow-up in the neuromuscular units? And these are by part of pneumology, and any center could participate in Spain. Not only neuromuscular reference hospital, but just any hospital could participate. Here we have the inclusion criteria. We have 6 inclusion criteria. They have already been described by Gemma before. These are respiratory involvement criteria. Of the 6 criteria, spirometry. This, I'm sure you've all done one, and the second was pressures, which could be PIM-PAM or SNP. And the third was gas exchange alterations. It could be pulse oximetry, basal arterial gasometry, and we could use capnography, mechanical ventilation as well. So we needed to have high levels of carbonic acid. Then we did imaging studies. We used X-rays, a CAT scan, MRI, whatever, to show an alteration of one or both diaphragm. And we also had 2 criteria. One, the labs was persistent elevation of CK, and then weakness, we have the SPAC pelvic, precisely this, the limb girdle weakness. And so these were neuromuscular. They weren't patients who had mechanical problems because of hypoventilation or sleep apnea or for example, some of these things are this COPD as well. This is what the study was looking for. We began in 2022. It was going to conclude in 2024, but we prolonged it. And our aim was to close the study until we included at least 300 patients, until we found at least one positive case of a Pompe patient who had respiratory involvement before the neuromuscular skeletal involvement. And this study, there had been 2 studies which came before this one. This is like the third one. The first was in 2017 in Portugal. This is the DIPPER study, same methodology, but with inclusion criteria that were more restrictive. In other words, they required that the patient have a muscle biopsy, with which this reduced the number of patients who could participate. They had 18 patients, and 3 patients had Pompe, with which there was a prevalence, an occult Pompe disease prevalence of 16.8%. And this was a lot, but because the selection was highly targeted. 2 years later, there was another study, and the Italians, they performed the same study, but their inclusion criteria were more reasonable. The inclusion criteria plus respiratory function, and not necessarily did they have a muscle biopsy. So there was more recruitment, 140 patients, and at the end of the study, these 2 groups, they were 2 brothers who had Pompe disease, and so it's not that they wanted to find one, but he had a brother, so that made 2. So the prevalence was 1.4%, and this seemed to be more reasonable. But in Portugal, there's a 17% of non-diagnosed Pompe in theory, and in Italy, 1.4% undiagnosed. We wanted to perform the study in Spain to see between the 2 what the situation was. So we had a study criteria. Our inclusion criteria were similar to the Italian one. And in number 84 patients, we found 1 patient with Pompe, and there was no muscle manifestation on the periphery, but it did happen. There was, in the diaphragm, this was 1.2%. And this seemed to be rather reasonable compared to the Italians. These were the tests of the patients we found. And this, as you notice, the progression of the forced vital capacity has decreased, but there was 79% that strictly was not pathological. And the drop in supine was -14. That's not absolutely pathological either. And then in the PIM, we saw a significant decrease since we followed, and the PEM also, and in the SNP and in the peak, the coughing peak. And this is a 67% with the diaphragmatic ultrasound. There was a thickening of the diaphragm here, and we finished in 24 with 33%. So these are the tests which were not conclusive, because to be conclusive that there was hypoventilation, we needed a test of gas exchange. And this was suggested that the patient had respiratory involvement of the neuromuscular profile. There was no doubt, because the patient was not obese and she didn't even smoke. So we ruled out those diagnoses. And we did a polysomnography. We studied the sleep situation, and the peak oxygen dioxide peak was 52. This was the CO2 peak. And this confirmed the diagnosis that the patient, in fact, did have nighttime hypoventilation. The only neuromuscular pathology was Pompe. So this is what it would be due to. This is a ultrasound of the diaphragm, and usually what we see with these patients at the diaphragmatic incursion, and the phrenic nerve is conserved. The diaphragm goes up and down. Here we saw that incursion there, and this is the thickness of the diaphragm in expiration. This is inspiration, and the difference really is not particularly striking. And to confirm that there was no neuromuscular involvement in the skeletal muscle of this woman of the lower limbs, and for example, her buttocks. In the MRI, it was confirmed that there was no pathological deposit, which would suggest Pompe disease. So what was involved was the diaphragm function. And how did we do this MRI if the patient had apnea, and she had diaphragmatic weakness and couldn't tolerate being in supine position, and she needed a respirator? So we had a respirator, a special one. It was completely made of plastic, and we have it for these particular cases. This is the only breather that you can use one of these devices, because if you put a bifunctional PPAP in one of these, you can put it in with metal. Well, just imagine when you turn it on, there's kind of like a little mini explosion because of the magnet. Well, so this is what we did for the plastic respirator, and we were able to perform the study. We were had complete peace of mind, and we were able to do this with no problem. Our tube was just a bit too short. We would have liked to have done it longer, but the tube wasn't long enough, so this is the way we did it. And these are the centers which participated in this Pompe study. They all included many patients in this hospital as well. And some others, they have more flow of neuromuscular students, so the 84 students, patients in the end, and then more in the 12th of Octubre hospital. And thanks to this study, not only is that patient under treatment, because the neurologist thought that patient should be treated due to the evidence of diaphragmatic involvement, but also, and besides the fact that the patient has it being treated right now, we were able to set up a registry for neuromuscular pathology at a national level, not only with Pompe, but with neuromuscular pathologies. And this is called the Neuromuscular Respiratory Registry. It's 1.5 years old, and we're going little by little. And now we've got 233 registries, and we want to increase the research in this neuromuscular pathology from the respiratory point of view. It's true that pneumologists, we are not really making many incursions in this neuromuscular pathology, and I think that it's important for us to work together. And the second study that I'm going to tell you about, I don't want to go on too long because there isn't that much time. And this was a study which we closed this year, and this is we did it in one center, the 12th of Octubre. This is the name of the study. And basically, we've had a follow-up with 15 patients with Pompe disease, and this was a very narrow respiratory disease to evaluate the sensitivity and specificity of the respiratory function tests, which we perform every 6 months. We had a cohort of 15 patients, and we wanted to see that there were sensitive tools to detect the respiratory involvement, better tools than the forced vital capacity. It was 79%, and strictly it wasn't pathological, but the patient already had orthopnea, pathological apnea, and so the FVC could be specific, but it wasn't particularly sensitive. And if we were trying to detect respiratory involvement with an unsensitive test, well, that's not the right way to go. So what do we do? Every 6 months, we did a functional respiratory follow-up. We did standard spirometry, forced vital capacity, supine spirometry, decrease of the forced vital capacity. We did maximum pressure test, PIM, SNP. We did diaphragmatic ultrasound. And we started doing this. It began in 2018. And for the capnography, we needed to admit the patients to the hospital. So with COVID, we lost a lot of capnographies because we couldn't send patients where anyone was COVID and no one wanted to go to a hospital in 2020 for a study. So we stopped doing capnographies. These are the results. These are data which have not yet been published. So please don't take photographs. If you do, it's just for personal use, but not to publish. These are the 15 patients that we found. We have 10 men, the average age. Treatment. Mechanical ventilation, 6 patients were ventilated already, and 8 were being followed up. They had neuromuscular peripheral involvement, but they didn't need ventilation, and one patient, it's the patient of Pompe, was ventilated during the follow-up period. So this is the way we do it. So in the treatment, most of the patients were already treated. 2 patients began the treatment during the study. It was the ERT treatment, and 3 don't have any respiratory neurological symptoms to begin the treatment, and the median of the patients was 7 years, and so we're very familiarized with this. This is what we learned. This chart is FVC. Patients treated and untreated, but most of the patients were treated. FVC has been described a decrease, progressive decrease, that is, and very slow in each review. But notice in the SNP, and we look at the EMP and the IMP, and this goes down much more significantly, and before the FV does. And these are charts which compare patients who are treated and with patients not untreated. So, and these are patients we see, statistically speaking. Sometimes there's we're a bit deceived, and these are patients who have gone untreated. And FVC is this one. The line is almost straight, but SNP goes down much more. EMP, and also this fraction. And this chart is easier to see. This is FVC, patients who are treated, untreated. Most were treated, and we see publications say that the treatment stabilizes FVC, even though it goes down very slowly, and other measures that are not FVC are more sensitive. And this can be helpful not only to monitor the treatment, but also to detect respiratory involvement. These are tools which there's a drop at much sooner, and where it could be a treatment, as we saw that in the Pompe patient. And this is a forced vital capacity. It declined progressively, minus 1.05% in our cohort, but diaphragmatic thickening 3.46, SNP 2.753, and then we have the MIP was 3.56%. And in the last conclusion of our study, that specifically the SNP and the TF are more robust in their statistics, are definitely much more sensitive than the FVC for the early detection of the respiratory dysfunction in patients with or without treatment. And thank you very much. Now I should like to invite my colleagues to come up to the panel up here, and we shall begin with our question and answer session. Esto no sé cómo se enciende.
Yo quería preguntarle.
I have a question, a specific question. You talk about CPAP and BiPAP. I have a volume-determined ventilator, volumetric ventilator. Is just a change of name? Is it different? And second question, during 2 meetings, I have heard you, Spanish doctors, talking about something that Dr. Bárbara Smith was doing for me, which is the diaphragmatic echography. And my doctor in Málaga, I told him, I have a lot of respect for himself, but it's so pleasant to listen to you talk about diaphragmatic ultrasound. I hope that when Bárbara Smith publishes, my doctor gets to know about it, okay? Just those 2 comments. As to your first issue, your first comment, no, they're 2 different devices. CPAP delivers continuous pressure in the higher airway to preserve permeability, keep them patent during apnea and hypopnea, but it is not a ventilatory system. So it would not change your breathing pattern. But the BiPAP, yes, is a non-invasive ventilator. It is a ventilator, and it modifies your respiratory flows and ventilations. Okay, the CPAP only intervenes when there is apnea or hypopnea during sleep. So neuromuscular patients in the vast majority need non-invasive ventilation, not CPAP. CPAP is usually not enough. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you properly. You were talking about diaphragmatic ultrasound and the impact. I couldn't really understand your question. I did understand. You got a diaphragmatic ultrasound and they told you here in Spain you don't have that. My doctor didn't even know about it, yeah. I'm sorry, we don't hear, obviously, the comments from the floor. Her answer is that, yes, we're also try to include it, but it's just that diaphragmatic ultrasound is very new, very recent, especially in Spain, and it still has a lot to prove, right? In all initial techniques, you need the number of publications. In the last years, there's been an increasing number of diaphragmatic ultrasound publications. I was almost exclusively employed by intensive care specialists. Now we're including it. It will be published this year in the clinical guidelines for Pompe. It is suggested in these years. It's not a definitive recommendation, but we hope that with the publication of the prospective study, the Pompeñol study, and the suggestion of the clinical guidelines, well, we hope it will be disseminated and accepted, okay? Diaphragmatic echography, MEP, MIP, and SNP, and not to restrict ourselves to forced vital capacity. FVC will only diagnose anything when it is quite frank and declared, and maybe we can reach an earlier diagnosis with that. Would you like to answer, Dr. Bárbara Smith? He alluded to you, and that your publication may reach people.
Yo soy enferma de Pompe, tengo...
I'm a Pompe patient. I'm in BiPAP and ERT, and I always get FVC in the sitting and supine position, and gases with the earlobe. And I asked, can you do any further tests? And for the first time in 14 years, I had the mean inspiratory pressure, the MIP. They say, no, since you have the BiPAP, the only necessary thing is the gas, blood gases, and the FVC. What would be the minimum set of tests with the sitting FVC and not even a proper blood gas analysis, just with an earlobe determination? Would it be enough? Is it enough, really? Well, tests are important to detect an early diagnosis of respiratory dysfunction so as to correct the nighttime hyperventilation as soon as possible, because it is the great prognostic factor. It is the main leading cause of death. If we can, we do a lot of batteries, but once the respiratory treatment is applied with the BiPAP, well, then maybe, yes, you can reduce the test, okay? You don't really need detection test. It's already been detected. It's already in treatment with the BiPAP, okay? Yes, capnography is necessary to show your ventilation. There could be a suggestion, but we can't tell everybody what to do. But it is a suggestion, okay? I'm sure that will improve with the publication and dissemination of the clinical guidelines that have just come out. Well, in the follow-up of the disease, a more detailed analysis best. I can reach the capnography with the ventilator software, and I know more or less about your ventilation, but I know how your disease is evolving. Maybe your disease has progressed, and even though the values of CO2 are okay, maybe I should adjust the ventilator parameters to your loss of respiratory function. Or maybe I don't, and as long as you use BiPAP, you can manage the same settings. It depends. You get the FVC, and then you can get the other tests. We hope to incorporate the rest of the test into the follow-up, but it's not generally accepted.
on that. I think that the battery of tasks that you've been discussing are very, very relevant, very, very helpful to identifying that your disease is stable, especially because in the night, that is when we can see early subtle changes in the neural drive to your respiratory muscles, in the ability of the diaphragm in its altered position to be able to carry out the function of breathing when it is receiving less support from the accessory respiratory muscles. But during the day, if you're looking to, again, stay active, increase your activity, preserve your walking function, preserve your strength, that may be where some of the other muscle tests that we've discussed, like the sniff nasal inspiratory pressure, or the thickening fraction, or the PIM-PEM.
MIP.
Where those tests might tell us a little bit more about the capacity that you need for other daily activities.
Era la última, ¿no? Ya está.
That was the last comment question. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, thank you to all our colleagues and speakers, Dr. Bárbara Smith, Dr. Hernández, and Dr. Díaz. Thank you very much for your presentations. Let's give them all a big hand for starting with this roundtable, the 16th meeting. And now we will listen to Dr. Jordi Díaz. Thank you very much once again. You're coming with us. Thank you, because you're helping us to understand better Pompe's disease. He's going to report on biomarkers together with his team at Newcastle University, a research center for muscular dystrophy for recent advances in personalized medicine. He identifies and validates the different biomarkers that will show in a much more accurate fashion what muscular deterioration and decline and glycogen accumulation causes in Pompe's disease. And he goes beyond that. He is trying to set up a standardized methodology for their determination and what is crucial for their future implementation in clinical trials and clinical practice application. So welcome, Jordi. The title is New Biomarkers for Pompe's Disease.
Gracias por la presentación y gracias a todos por invitarme un año más.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you for inviting me 1 year more to share with you all the research we undertake at the Newcastle group. As it was said, I'm going to talk about new ways to monitor patients with Pompe disease. Many of you have participated in these studies. I think it's an excellent opportunity to share with you all the results. I don't need to explain Pompe's disease to you. You know about it. I just wish to remind you that here we have an accumulation of glycogen within the muscular fibers inside the muscle. And the glycogen storage accumulation induces cellular changes which lead to death of the muscular fibers. And in time, they will be replaced by fibrotic and fatty tissue. Fat and fibrosis replacement. We have two main phenotypes, classical infantile onset disease and late onset disease, and the symptomatology is different. It is much more serious in infancy with very weak muscular weakness, hypotony, and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, respiratory insufficiency, and if not treated, they die within the first year of life. And late onset, adult onset Pompe disease are highly heterogeneous. After 2-3 years of life, it may start from atypical childhood presentation during adolescence, even later on than 30. And if I go to analyze the muscle, we see that in children, there are massive quantities of glycogen. There is a lot of glycogen everywhere. And yet in adults, the amount of glycogen could be minimum. And even the biopsies may render a normal result. So it is very different. Adults do not accumulate as much glycogen. That's why everything occurs much slower. So there is the difference I wanted to mention, and I'm going to focus mostly on adult types of Pompe, late onset Pompe disease. We have clinical guidelines on how to begin treatment and so on. Well, in order to start the treatment, we usually wait for the patient to develop symptoms.
Punto de vista de debilidad muscular. Tenemos que ser capaces de demostrar.
And they rely on weakness, muscular weakness that we have to demonstrate, or weakness of the respiratory musculature. Well, you have heard excellent presentations on the assessment of respiratory function in order to identify problems. And then we carry out a physical exam, and we ask the patient to do the test, 10-meter walk, 6-minute walk test, and so on. It's just that in Pompe's disease, the axial muscles are the ones more involved in the beginning, the back, the adductors in the lower limbs, and the clinical translation leads to very low symptomatology. And the patients come to our hospital when they're weak elsewhere, and these muscles are already lost. So we're late in delivering treatment. So we have to identify much earlier the patients who are declining or beginning to exhibit symptoms. And then we are delivering treatment, and we want to monitor the patients appropriately. This is a crucial need, and it is important to identify the tests and biomarkers that indicate with small changes whether the patient is responding to the therapy or not, or may benefit from a change. So some of the guidelines have changed in the inclusion of magnetic resonance tests because of the evidence, and thanks to all of you, because you participated in the magnetic resonance study in Barcelona. You exhibited so much patience. You visited us at the hospital, and this has helped, together with other studies, that MRI is a useful marker for follow-up and to identify the patients who begin to develop symptoms. What about the response to ERT therapy? Well, some may get worse after many years of treatment. We'll talk about that at the round table. But beyond these curves, after the second, third year, we know that you have a very slow progression, very slow decline, but we'll focus on the right-hand curves. There are 3 types of patients, and this is what we see on a daily basis. Some patients don't pay attention to statistics. They improve and slightly go on improving and even do better 5-7 years after the onset of therapy. And yet other patients do not change, but at least remain stable. And other patients do get worse despite treatment. So responses are heterogeneous, and a single test to identify the different type of responses is complicated. So it's difficult to perform follow-up. There are 3 different studies we have undertaken at our group. So we know that in Pompe's disease there are tisular abnormalities, accumulation of glycogen and fatty replacement that have an impact on muscular impairment with time. Here is the first study where you participated. You were so patient. And so for many years, we were measuring your walking ability with gait analysis. Look at this. 5 different patients. Some recognize yourselves, but look at the distance below, right? This is the 6-minute walking test. It gives us a number, how many meters you walk, but look at the quality of the gait. How do they walk? Well, some work at a brisker pace, some are weighing out, some are stiffer. You know, just the number isn't enough. It's not enough. How about the quality of the gait, the analysis, the gait pattern analysis? So how do we do this? Well, with these wearables, the sensors that the patient incorporates, and so we can't provide much better information. Efion is the company. Efion Health has helped us with these sensors, you know, in the electromyography, the different sensors and straps so as to perceive the movement of the hip, the other joints, and some insoles, and then we can follow up remotely, and then we analyze the information. So now we have included 24 patients with Pompes. We have studies with time and controls matched by sex, age, and gait speed.
Grupo de resultados.
This is the first group of results. These are the distances, the walking distances that you could do with the podometer, you know, the step counter. But okay, the duration, the step duration is increased in the patients with Pompes, cadence is decreased, number of steps is cut down, the time in the stance time is prolonged before you begin to step, and the distance, of course, the 6 minutes distance is reduced. I didn't need the wearables, okay? But now that we have the new software and the new devices, I needn't go into detail, but now with the new measurements, we can see changes in the patterns. Here you can see the first step with one foot and then the second step with the other. And the musculature called upon is different. The muscle drive is different. Here we have the controls, and in blue, the Pompes curves. You can see very clearly that they're very different. The Pompe patients need to activate and engage many more muscles, and there is a lot of waddle at the level of the trunk and at the level of the pelvis. And this we can detect with the new sensors. And so we have a much better description of the disease. With each movement of the foot or the leg, I have more or less 100 variables. And if I follow the patient for 6 minutes, like about 3,000 steps, I do have a huge amount of information. So it's difficult to cope with it.
Herramientas de inteligencia artificial que nos han...
So we applied artificial intelligence tools in order to identify the variables to distinguish the controls from Pompes. And we have created a score, okay? Something much easier. A score to measure the gait analysis. It's an artificial score evaluation, okay, to see the differences.
And this score, which we call the gait score, gives a good differentiation between the Pompe patients and the control patients. That is to say, it's useful to see if a patient has a gait problem. It could be a Pompe patient or a control patient. But not only this, but also with the follow-up, we have these green lines, which you see up here. We have all the patients we have followed, and then we can see these individual lines where there's a tendency to see a worsening in a considerable number of patients. While we only look at the 6-minute walking distance over time, we see that the lines are straight. Obviously, we found the 3 possible situations. Patients where the 6-minute walking test tells me that a patient is improving because he can walk 30 meters more, and the gait score continues the same tendency, and sometimes on other occasions the quality of they walk more. In other words, where there's a worsening with the 6 minutes walking test, and the score also coincides with what's very interesting as a group. If I do the 6-minute walking test, I'd say the patient is stable, but I can identify the fact that he isn't stable because the quality of that gait is getting worse. So it makes sense to look at the gait in depth and not just think about the number. These determinations can show that the patient is worsening, even though the number might be the same. It might be worthwhile to follow this closer up and to use other measurements in patients who have not been treated. We could begin to identify changes in their gait pattern, and this would also help me to decide what treatment to begin. This is the first study we did. We've analyzed the function, but also I can look at the muscle, and we use MRI for this. And as you know so well, we've done this for many years now. I wanted to show you the sequence of events which we find in Pompe. The muscle, originally it's healthy. It begins to accumulate glycogen in the inside, and in the long term it accumulates fat. MRI helps us to analyze that fat. We can do this with different sequences. This is three-point Dixon. We'll see this white tissue we see inside the muscles. Notice here, I don't know if you can see the arrow. No, you can't, but there is subcutaneous adipose whitish area, and if I look around and look inside the muscles, I see these muscles are being substituted by fat. This can be quantified. Let us later speak about measuring the glycogen with MRI. This was a study done in Barcelona. We lasted for 4 years. There were 37 patients included. 27 were symptomatic, 10 asymptomatic. 4 years long was the study. This enabled us to learn a lot. And one thing we learned is that asymptomatic patients who said, I don't have any problem in my daily life, but in MRI, things can be found. We are able to identify changes in the musculature, mainly in the paraspinal and the adductor muscles. And we see a healthy person with good paraspinals. And then here you have a person who has changes, and we notice that these muscles, we see there's a substitution with fat, and this is the adductor muscle here in the leg, over here on the lower right. And so Pompe patients say, I don't have any motor problem, but if I go and look at this in depth, I can identify this before they even begin to have symptoms, and I can help them to begin to treat them more early on. Now this is the 3-point Dixon, and here we have our areas of interest, and we quantify the amount of total fat. I can see that a patient has 49% on one muscle, and at 1 year later, 51%. There's a 2% increase. Our eye is impossible to see an increase in a 2% of fat. We need software such as this that we are using. But why is this useful? It's useful due to several reasons. Firstly, because if we follow the patients throughout 1 year, the only measurement that our study showed a change after 1 year was an MRI study. All of the other tests with patients were stable. In one way or another, this is telling us that MRI has the ability to know earlier what is happening to the patients before the functional test. Why? Because MRI looks at the tissue. It's not looking at the function, but it's looking at the change which occur inside the tissue. About 2% was the increase, and later we learned that throughout time, increase was progressive. It was stable, about 2%. And after 3 years, we could observe functional changes. When the patients had a progressive increase, this ended up having an impact on the patient's function. By accumulating fat in your muscles is not good. This justifies that you may worsen from the motor point of view. This has meant that these studies are used in clinical trials. This is why MRI is being used, because we can detect changes in a short period of time, and we can tell us if this treatment is being good or not. One of the things which we began doing ever since I came to Newcastle University was to quantify glycogen. It's the first thing that is accumulated. Can this be done? Yes, there are different techniques which enable us to do this. We have worked with spectroscopy, carbon spectroscopy, and there was a physicist, and basically his name is Pete Thewell. This is a coil, and we put this coil on the quadriceps and the carbon atoms that are in the muscles. And glycogen has a lot of carbon. What it tells us, it gives us a spectrum with these peaks. And this little peak that you see over here, this is the glycogen. And this technique is very sensitive. It enables us to see changes in the amount of glycogen associated to not eating for one day. Or diabetic patients, when before and after they inject insulin, it helps us to detect changes in glycogen. We performed a study whereby we studied patients with Pompe disease for 2 years using this technique and other MRI techniques, motor tests, and biomarkers found in the blood. What have we found? A healthy patient, and we didn't find much glycogen. It was a minute peak. You could barely see it. If put my antenna on the coil in the anterior part of the quadriceps muscle in the pacey patients, I'll see a peak that is more obvious. If I put it in the posterior compartment, the peak is even higher. I'd just like to mention that the muscles of the posterior compartment are those which are involved earlier with Pompe. The anterior compartment, they are involved much later on. The amount of glycogen, we don't know why, but it's not the same in every single muscle. It seems to be more prominent in the posterior compartment. And when we have compared this, we see that it's elevated in Pompe patients. In the quadriceps, these patients are not significant compared to the control, but they are when I look at the posterior compartment. In other words, in given areas of the body, I am able to identify glycogen, and I'm able to identify differences between the patients and the controls. So one of the interesting things is if I give a treatment to reduce glycogen, and not enzyme or genetic therapy or gene therapy, we have a non-invasive tool. You don't need a biopsy, and this enables me to quantify the glycogen and the changes throughout time. And so someone might ask me, is this measurement important? In other words, can you really see if there is more glycogen if the muscles are more involved, or does this predict something? And for the moment, the studies we are performing, yes, I can identify glycogen, but I don't see that there's a correlation, more glycogen, more fat, or more inflammation. No, I don't see that. We don't see a direct correlation. Neither do we see a correlation in the adult between the amount of glycogen and the changes in the functional test, nor can we predict changes at 1 year. So notice that this is just very, very slow progression, and we'd like to be able to follow them for a longer period of time. But the tests at 1 year, and this is something I found very interesting when we were able to check these results. If you remember, I showed you that fat always progresses and increases. With glycogen, what happens is there is a great variability. This makes sense because then glycogen and the muscle uses it to get energy. So we see that there are patients where there's an increase, patients where it is stable, and others where the amount of glycogen goes down in the muscle after 1 year follow-up. And so as a measurement, it is a measurement, and the net glycogen value is not really telling us that much. I think we'll have to follow the patients for a longer time to see if there's an increase or a reduction. So we need to continue following these patients for a longer period of time. Something else we saw, that the fat influences the levels of glycogen. If you don't have muscle because it's been substituted by fat, obviously look at this patient over here, everything is white. I don't see any glycogen peak at all. And this is one of the limitations we have for using this technique in the patients who unfortunately and ever so frequently come to the studies with a lot of fat in their muscles already. We're going to start a new study. We're going to study these patients with a late onset Pompe disease, 15 treated with glucosidase alpha, and 15 patients with SIPA and MIG. And we have markers in urine, in blood, and carbon spectroscopy. We'll begin this next year and see how things are going. So, imaging studies. Well, conclusion that the fat fraction is well established in Pompe's disease, and the glycogen study needs to be explored in greater depth to see what it tells us. And the difference I wanted to make with the infantile patients, if this study had been done with children in the classic way, the glycogen peak would have been sky high, because they have much more glycogen than the adult. This is very complex, and we couldn't do it. can I measure glycogen in another way? Yes, there are biomarkers, and this was an idea that came from Cristina Domendez, who works in the 12th of October hospital. We thought it was a great idea, and we use it, and we're working together on this, where we can check the levels of tetrasaccharide glucose in urine. So, yes, in a given moment, we save the urine from all of our patients who came for the test, and we have everything in a freezer. And we'd like to say, what is this? What is tetrasaccharide? It's a product which is found in urine, and it's found in it's a derivative of glycogen. It's found in urine, low levels, and this is seen in Pompe disease because this is a well-established biomarker. We call it urine hexose tetrasaccharide, and in these children, there's often a lot of glycogen. It goes down when we treat with that enzyme. So what do we know about the adult? In the adult, we know that the information that comes from the trials, the hex form, and the treatment is changed. This is a COMET study. We see that the patients began with enzyme treatment, and the levels go down. There is a bit of variability, and it goes down with the passage of time, showing that there is lower amounts of glycogen. So this treatment cleans the glycogen. So what did we notice? If we take our patients, the patients who participated in this study, we see a variability in the results. These are the results in symptomatic patients who were treated. And notice from the controls have levels around 1. So here we had patients level 1, 2, 3 was their level, and others had 25, 22. Bit of a variability, but the vast majority had very low numbers. The asymptomatics who hadn't began the treatment, it was a bit higher, but as a group there was really no difference. And in the asymptomatics, there was a little variability. I thought this was very interesting to check these patients, the asymptomatic ones, the symptomatic patients who had higher levels than the general group, to see how they progressed with time. And this is their progression using the 6-minute walking test. We saw that 5-4 had a clear worsening, and when their worsening was compared to the changes in the group that had the normal levels, then these are the ones that had high levels. Notice that the worsening was much higher, but not in all, obviously. This patient practically didn't worsen in spite of having high levels. And in the other group, in spite of having low levels of tetrasaccharide, there were patients who worsened considerably. And we looked at the fat in their MRI. There was a progressive increase in all of them. And when we compared the fatty changes, these patients with a very high fat fraction, they had high level of that fat compared to the large group, which was stable, although some had an increase. These results, what they are telling me is that this is a good biomarker because it tells us how much glycogen is found in the muscle indirectly, but above all what it's telling us is that I have a patient treated who has very high levels of tetrasaccharide. Then this patient, based on these data, will run a greater risk of having a worsening of the motor function and in the MRI. And so this makes sense because there's lower clearing with this treatment. So I think we should study different pathways more to see if they can be used in our clinic and to treat our patients better. You might say, well, what happens with those who begin the treatment? Well, here you see, and the 4 that began this treatment, there was a decrease. But when I look a little bit further at long term, notice that one went down, but another went up. And these 3 went down, then this went up a bit. And so what we're seeing with MRI, that this there can be an oscillation. We see the oscillation here in this indirect measurement of glycogen. So with the asymptomatic patients, I'm seeing the same thing. It's interesting, a long-term pattern. Some patients go down, some it goes up. This first patient over here is a patient who didn't have muscle weakness in the MRI. It was normal, but there was a first high measurement. These next 2 patients over here who had a second and high measurement are patients who never developed any problem, but notice that they go up, then they go down. But notice this, look at this patient over here. It's a patient who began in the average level, went it up, and then in the last moment, it's even higher. And this boy, he had an MRI, a normal MRI, with fat MRI. We did this spectroscopy. It was a bit high, but the interesting thing here is that to measure urine with time, there had been a progressive increase, and he began the treatment because he ended up with having muscle weakening. So in isolated fashions, asymptomatic patients show that this measurement can also help us to identify a patient who he's a closer looking at, in other words. Well, markers, progression markers in Pompe. Gait analysis. Well, I think that MRI studies, fat fraction, and then our biomarkers, blood and urine. Here's my last slide. I'd like to thank the people who work in the Newcastle team and who work with us, particularly Chamo, who coordinates the entire study, and the people from Eption and the people here in Pompe for your ongoing support. AEE Pompe, you have helped us forever. And when I was in Barcelona now, some patients come to Newcastle to participate in the studies. I also like everyone who gives us the money, because without their support, this would all be impossible. And the people in the Newcastle group, and thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.
Hola Jordi. Quería hacerte dos preguntas. La primera no es tanto sobre la enfermedad, sino sobre la aproximación utilizada, todo el tema de medicina digital y los wearables. Hemos intentado reproducir también para una glucogenosis.
Wearables and the approach. We tried to do it with the digital system, and it was very costly, very difficult to find a digital health company that had any interest in getting involved in rare diseases. They didn't see any profitability, and we did it. They lost interest and removed the financing. Trying to do it with public money, with an invitation to tender, and then an official bidding. It was very different. So I don't know how you convinced people at Ephion. How did you manage to count on them? We have participated ourselves in Ephion's development. It's a startup starting from Barcelona University. It originated from the Barcelona University and Hospital. They wanted to use their sensors, and they looked for us. We decided to perform a study. They did charge us money in the beginning to perform the study. So in the beginning, no, we just didn't have any sponsor. It was not financed. It was completely altruistic. We carried out the motor assessments for free. We devoted our time. Ephion would send the technicians on an altruistic basis, and they just wanted to validate the test, and they did so with different diseases. I can get you in contact with Ephion. They want to try this out in more muscular diseases, okay? You applied artificial intelligence to interpret the results obtained with the gait analysis with the wearables. We requested money for artificial intelligence projects, and the answer is that 300 patients were too few for machine learning in order to analyze and predict the results. So how did you manage? You have 29, 30 patients. How did you do it? Yeah, instead of patients, we use steps, 3,000 steps per patient per 29, then yes, the numbers are enough. So don't use patients, use steps, variables for each of the steps so that you can distinguish from controls and Pompe's steps, not patients. And then you have enough number of variables for artificial intelligence. Okay, thank you, thank you. A practical instance. Okay, let's see. You're talking about biomarkers and MRI and tetrasaccharides and some markers that can lead you to decide whether you treat a patient before they physically exhibit the symptoms. But isn't there a problem when you're applying this to a patient who's already treated? Now that we have possibilities to change treatment, to switch, can we really do this? The neurologists on an ordinary basis can perform this and decide to switch? Yeah. I knew you were going to ask. I knew. I expected this kind of question, and I'm fully convinced, okay? And I do have some slides. I didn't show them because I didn't have time. Let me see if I can recover them. The tetrasaccharides, the hex4 in urine determination can be requested through Sanofi, right? Sanofi provides that possibility, okay? You can send the urine sample to Sanofi and it's easy for them. So yes, they can use it, okay? I want to be pragmatic. Let's keep down to earth. It is a biomarker that we're assessing in patients with Pompe's patient, and in early onset in infantile Pompe's, it's well documented. In the adult patients, this is the largest study reported so far, and it is economic, it's a urine sample, and it's a cost-effective determination. Now, MRI and the Dystrophy test is a sequence that is actually available at the majority of the hospitals. It is very commonly used for liver assessment. It's not science fiction, okay? The Dixon sequence, but for Dixon analysis, you need a specific software, and the software is costly and tedious and time-consuming. You need hours, you know. When I carried out my Pompe study, we took about 4 hours per patient. Who has 4 hours? Come on. Nobody has 4 hours for a Pompe patient. And you had to do it on your own free time at the weekend, Saturday afternoon, to outline whether the fat is greater than 2% or so. Nobody has that time. 4 hours is too much. So one of the things that we did with this tool is here. Look, it's deep learning AI, okay? A deep learning-based tool with AI. We first hand segmentation, the thigh, the pelvis, and the legs. We have generated this, which is the cytoarchitectonic structure for the neural network. And we have been able now to generate an automatic production of the data. I'm sorry, I'm lost. Sorry. And now we have automated recording of the muscular analysis. Let's see. And here it is. Yes. I analyze the MRI. The device starts to analyze it, and it's measuring the sections. At the beginning, I had 50 MRIs, and it made mistakes, but at the end, in the long run, with the machine learning, it will learn, and finally, it's 12 seconds per MRI. So before I used up 4 hours, and now it's 20, 25 seconds. And we have developed this, and it will be available through the website so that people can upload and download their MRIs and quantify the fat fraction. We're going to make it available. The only problem with the Dixon method was that nobody could use it in clinical practice because of lack of time. But now that we have deep learning tools, we can introduce something readily available in the brief, in the future it will be made available by means of a website. And the data analysis, no, sorry, no, you cannot do this in ordinary clinical practice. No, you need the FEON sensors and the systems. No, sorry, that's for research studies. But at least if we generate sufficient evidence, since it is a good marker for neuromuscular diseases, maybe we may encourage the interest. But no, I think it's only for research purposes, not for clinical application. Well, thank you very much. We may go on the discussion with the last panel discussion. We have like about 20 minutes pause. About 6 o'clock, yeah. About 6 o'clock, let's come back. Let's try to be prompt, okay? To resume our session. Thank you very much.